1. What if I told you that the most famous symbol of Roman democracy was a lie from the beginning? Not a promise, not a principle, but a political weapon. SPQR was never for the people, it was for controlling them. 4 letters, Senatus Populusque Romanus, tattooed onto history like a holy creed. You've seen them on marble arches in Hollywood epics, etched onto coins passed from emperor to slave. But behind that Latin glow was something far colder, a machine for war. Rome didn't conquer with swords alone, it conquered with symbols. And SPQR was its deadliest. Because once you convince the masses that war is waged in their name, you can make conquest look like justice. You can make empire feel like freedom. This is the true story of how 4 simple letters fueled centuries of violence and how the illusion of the people became history's most dangerous justification for endless war. Welcome to Shadows of Ancient History, a journey that spans the entire history of the Roman Empire, one symbol at a time. And today we expose the most seductive lie ever carved into stone. When SPQR Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome first appeared, it seemed a noble idea. A union between governing elites and common citizens, a republic bound together by shared fate. But behind the clean Latin script carved into stone, a murkier reality stirred. In the aftermath of the Roman monarchy's fall around 509 BCE, the republic needed legitimacy. No longer could a single king wield divine authority. Instead, Rome's new rulers, the patrician class, had to build something more abstract, something that looked like democracy. And so SPQR was born, a symbolic fusion of senatorial will and popular consent, a neat trick of language that gave the appearance of unity while hiding hierarchy. The phrase began to adorn state documents, military standards, and public buildings. To the plebs, it said, "You are Rome." But real power was locked in the Senate's curule chairs and aristocratic families that traded consulships like heirlooms. Elections were held, but only after candidates bribed and bargained their way through the forum. Historians still debate whether the early republic ever truly balanced power between classes, or whether SPQR was simply a poetic shield to keep plebeian hands off the reins. What's clear is this: Rome didn't build equality, it built spectacle, and SPQR was its opening act. As external threats grew, the Senate leveraged the phrase to unify the masses. Wars weren't declared by generals or kings, they were blessed by the Senate and people. It sounded fair, righteous, democratic, but it disguised the machinery beneath. The Senate held the real strings, financing armies, choosing commanders, steering Rome's destiny from marble halls far from the front lines. And then came the strange case of the Decemviri, 10 men appointed in 451 BCE to reform the republic's laws. For a brief moment, they ruled absolutely. Their legal reforms birthed the 12 tables, the foundation of Roman law. But their power metastasized. By 449 BCE, they had become tyrants, even ordering executions without trial. The people rose up not just against them, but against the illusion that SPQR protected them. This was the first great crack in the symbol's perfection. The decemvirate was abolished and tribunes were restored to defend the people. Yet SPQR endured untouched, like a mask that could not be removed even when it was cracked. The paradox deepened. SPQR was both the banner of freedom and the blanket under which autocrats smothered dissent. It represented the people, but it did not listen to them. It spoke of unity, but only whispered in the ears of senators. Still, the image of SPQR spread. Etched into coins, it passed through the hands of the poor. Plastered on monuments, it became the backdrop of triumphs. Carried into battle, it gave soldiers a holy cause. And every time Rome raised its legions, SPQR marched with them, not as a symbol of the people's will, but as a license to conquer in their name. Thus began the long war, fought not just with steel, but with story. Not just to defend Rome, but to expand it. And in every march, every siege, every blood-soaked victory, the 4 letters never wavered. SPQR. The idea that war could be noble because it was waged by the people. But what happens when that idea outgrows its reality? When the Republic begins to hunger for more, that's where our story sharpens. The Samnites were not barbarians. They were Rome's neighbors, mountain-dwelling, fiercely independent, with a complex society and their own vision of dignity. And for a while they coexisted with Rome, until they stood in the way. The Second Samnite War erupted in 326 BCE, and the justification was painted in glowing ink. Rome declared that it was defending Capua, an ally. But beneath that veneer lay a hunger for southern Italy, and SPQR gave that hunger a moral cloak. The Senate and people of Rome had spoken. This wasn't imperialism, it was protection. As Roman legions trudged through the Apennines, they carried their standards high. SPQR flapped in the wind, not just to rally troops, but to signal righteousness. And when those legions were humiliated at the Caudine Forks, forced to pass under a yoke and surrender, it wasn't just Rome's pride that was wounded, it was SPQR itself. But Rome didn't retreat, it rebranded. In the decades that followed, Rome systematically absorbed its neighbors under the banner of alliance. The phrase "just war" became institutionalized. A war was just if it had the backing of SPQR. A war was just if Rome claimed to be provoked. A war was just if it ended with new land, new taxes, and new roads. Historians still debate whether Rome's Punic Wars were driven by defense or avarice, but the way they were marketed is undeniable. Carthage, Rome's great maritime rival, was portrayed as treacherous, dangerous, and godless. The Senate declared in full pomp that Rome must strike before being struck, and so SPQR sanctioned in one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, the Second Punic War. When Hannibal crossed the Alps in 218 BCE, bringing elephants and vengeance, Rome claimed it was vindicated. But the war would stretch for 17 years, devastating Italian soil and draining Roman coffers. Still, the Senate insisted SPQR would never surrender. The strange tale of the Fabian strategy emerged here, a passive delaying tactic devised by Quintus Fabius Maximus. Rather than confront Hannibal directly, he shadowed his movements, refusing open battle. The public mocked him as Cunctator the Delayer. But in time, this slow attrition wore Hannibal down. Rome didn't win with glory, it won with endurance. And when it did, the vengeance was unspeakable. By the time of the Third Punic War, Carthage was no threat. But SPQR declared it was still a danger, a spark waiting to ignite. So Rome razed the city, salted its fields, enslaved its survivors, all under the same letters that once claimed to stand for the people. In the East, the same theater played out. Rome approached Greece not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In 196 BCE, the Roman general Flamininus stood at the Isthmian Games and proclaimed freedom to all Greeks under SPQR's protection. The crowd erupted in cheers. But soon that freedom turned to tribute, to taxes, to garrisons, and eventually to annexation. The irony was stark. The very symbol that once defended liberty in the streets of Rome was now a seal of submission across 3 continents. And yet the illusion persisted. SPQR did not say empire. It said us. It whispered, "This is your war," even when it wasn't. Even when Roman citizens were drafted to die for trade routes they'd never use. Even when taxes rose to fund fleets that sailed to lands they'd never see. Even when their sons bled in the mud of Iberia or froze in the forests of Gaul. The Republic was becoming a machine, fueled by conquest, justified by symbols. And the strange thing, it worked. Because SPQR wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was a shield against guilt, a banner of belonging, a myth that turned every campaign into a civic duty, every enemy into an existential threat, every province into a righteous reward. But what happens when the symbol is no longer enough? What happens when generals begin to wield it for themselves? That's when the Republic begins to unravel. Julius Caesar didn't need a crown, he had SPQR. By the 1st century BCE, the Republic was sick, bloated with provinces strained by inequality and bleeding from decades of internal strife. The Senate, once a body of stoic debate, had become a theater of fear and bribery. Violence lurked in the forum, and behind every speech was a dagger waiting to be drawn. Caesar saw the cracks and filled them with ambition. Appointed governor of Gaul in 58 BCE, he waged a brutal campaign of conquest that made him a legend. But more importantly, he framed his every action under SPQR. He wasn't a warlord, he was a servant of the Republic. His victories, Rome's victories. His massacres, justified by the Senate's authority, whether real or forged. Historians still debate whether Caesar crossed the Rubicon in defense of his dignity or in pursuit of power. But the moment he marched on Rome in 49 BCE, he brought the weight of SPQR with him. He wasn't attacking the Republic, he claimed he was saving it. The Senate, he insisted, had become corrupt. The people's voice had been stolen, and so he wrapped himself in the very letters that once stood for the balance between Senate and people and turned them into a weapon of personal conquest. The civil war that followed left tens of thousands dead, cities razed, brothers fighting brothers, and yet when Caesar finally emerged victorious, he refused the title of king. Instead, he was dictator, perpetuo dictator for life. A paradox in terms, but palatable because SPQR still floated above the regime. Even after his assassination in 44 BCE, stabbed by senators beneath a statue of Pompey, the symbol endured. The killers believed they were restoring the Republic, but instead they triggered its final transformation. Enter Octavian, the heir, the shadow. Where Caesar wielded power with charisma, Octavian mastered the art of perception. He took the name Augustus. He built monuments. He praised the Republic, restored senatorial rituals, and filled public offices with familiar titles. But make no mistake, the Republic was dead. Augustus didn't abolish SPQR. He revived it. In 27 BCE, he famously returned power to the Senate, only to be granted Imperium Maius, greater command over all provinces. He became princeps, first citizen. Not emperor, not tyrant, just a leading servant of the Senate and people of Rome. A strange event marked this illusion. The first settlement in 27 BCE was hailed as the restoration of the Republic. Statues were erected, coins minted, and above it all, SPQR. The same four letters now emblazoned the shields of an empire ruled by a single man. Augustus mastered the game. He waged war in the name of peace. He expanded the borders while preaching restraint. And he cloaked every campaign in the moral authority of SPQR. When provinces rebelled, he quelled them as a restorer of order. When senators grumbled, he outlived them with patience and praise. And when his successors, Tiberius, Caligula, Nero, descended into madness, they did so under the same banner. SPQR no longer meant consent, it meant continuity. It gave imperial brutality the blessing of ancient tradition. Even as emperors built palaces on Palatine Hill, executed rivals in dark corridors, and bled the provinces dry with taxes, the four letters remained. The illusion was intact. One strange monument captures this transformation. The Res Gestae Divi Augusti, the deeds of the divine Augustus carved into stone after his death. It lists battles won, cities conquered, roads built, but always with the claim that it was done with the consent of SPQR. By now, the phrase had become untouchable. It gave emperors legitimacy without admitting tyranny. It allowed soldiers to slaughter governors to extort and merchants to profit without guilt. And it gave the Roman people something to believe in long after their voices had faded. Because symbols once born rarely die, they evolve, they adapt, they survive their makers. And SPQR, once a hopeful contract between Senate and citizen, had become something else entirely, a myth that justified an empire. Across the windswept cliffs of Britannia, in the sand-choked hills of Judea, and deep in the shadowy forests of Germania, the letters SPQR arrived long before the olive branches. By the 1st century, CE, Rome was no longer expanding cautiously, it was inhaling the world. And wherever it went, it carried not just swords, but stories. SPQR gave these campaigns a divine aura. The Senate and people of Rome had spoken. Resistance was no longer political, it was treason. In Judea, the flames of rebellion never truly died. The province had been simmering under Roman rule for decades, but it was in 66 CE that the Great Jewish Revolt erupted. SPQR responded not with reform, but fire. General Vespasian and later his son Titus marched in under the pretense of restoring order. But what followed was the destruction of Jerusalem's Second Temple, a cultural and spiritual catastrophe etched into Jewish memory forever. Yet the official story, Rome had silenced chaos. The Senate issued triumphal proclamations. Coins were minted, showing a weeping Judea beneath a Roman soldier. And etched above always SPQR, as if the people had asked for this war, as if the Republic still listened. In Britannia, Rome faced tribes who fought like shadows. The strange and brutal uprising of Boudica in 60 CE nearly drove Rome from the island. Her forces burned Roman towns to the ground, including Londinium. Rome's retribution was swift and merciless. Tacitus claimed 80,000 Britons died, but official records framed it differently. The Senate and people had restored peace. The rebellious queen was a danger to civilization. SPQR had brought law where there was savagery. Historians still debate whether these rebellions were responses to Roman cruelty or unavoidable collisions between cultures. But what's less debated is how Rome portrayed them. Enemies weren't just foes, they were threats to the very essence of order. In Germania, the forest swallowed legions whole. The most infamous example came in 9 CE when Arminius, trained by Rome itself, led Germanic tribes in ambush against 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. Rome lost nearly 20,000 men. It was a psychic shock. But rather than admit failure, the Senate declared renewed commitment. SPQR would never retreat. New campaigns were launched, borders fortified. Honor, they claimed, must be avenged not for the empire, but for the people. The reality was stranger. Rome often created the very enemies it later crushed. Governors provoked uprisings through excessive taxation, forced conscription, or sacrilegious acts. Then when violence erupted, Rome framed it as rebellion. And SPQR, the ancient symbol of mutual trust, became the executioner's mask. But the manipulation didn't stop in the provinces. Inside Rome, emperors used external threats to control the city. Grain shortages, blame the unrest in Egypt. Political tension, blame the Gallic tribes. Emperors staged public games celebrating victories that were never real, all to soothe the mob and remind them that SPQR still reigned. One strange event revealed the thinness of the illusion: the year of the 4 emperors, 69 CE. After Nero's death, generals across the empire, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, scrambled for control. Civil war spilled into every corner of Roman life, yet every claimant insisted they ruled by the will of SPQR. Even as legions fought, fellow Roman cities burned, and alliances shattered, each banner carried the same 4 letters. The symbol was no longer a truth, it was a tool, a shield for ambition. A lie repeated so often that it became indistinguishable from faith. The Senate itself, once a deliberative body, had become a rubber stamp. By the 2nd century, it echoed whatever the emperor desired. And SPQR, still inscribed on monuments and legal decrees, gave every imperial whim the fragrance of consent. So when rebellions flared in the east, when citizens were crucified for tax resistance, when temples were desecrated for empire's sake, the record read the same: SPQR has authorized the response. SPQR protects peace. SPQR defends civilization. Even when it didn't, even when it couldn't. Because by now, SPQR had become a reflex, a ritual, a sacred fiction. The symbol outlived the reality. But Rome was teaching the world something: that conquest is more palatable when painted as duty. That expansion feels noble when cloaked in democracy. That symbols, if repeated often enough, can become the truth. And the world was watching. When the Roman Empire finally collapsed in the West and forced Augustus, the world did not forget SPQR, because Rome had planted more than roads and aqueducts. It had planted an idea. That war, if wrapped in virtue, becomes destiny. In the centuries that followed, echoes of SPQR resounded in the hearts of empires rising from Rome's ashes. Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine emperors, the papacy all invoked Roman authority. They weren't just rulers, they were heirs. Even the Renaissance, that rebirth of classical admiration, revived SPQR in frescoes and architecture. In Florence and Venice and Paris, republicanism and empire danced together again, wearing Rome's ancient mask. Symbols were no longer just heritage, they were justification. But perhaps no appropriation was as direct or as enduring as that of modern nation-states. In 1861, the city of Rome inscribed SPQR anew on its official coat of arms, even as Italy fought to unify a fractured peninsula. It was a republic reborn in myth, but still struggling with monarchy, fascism, and foreign rule. The letters returned, but the meaning had changed. And across the Atlantic, another experiment was unfolding. The United States of America, founded on liberty, resistance to tyranny, and a Senate of its own, looked to Rome as a model. Capitol Hill fasces on government buildings, Latin mottos on coins, all shadows of a fallen republic. But it wasn't just aesthetics. Rome taught something deeper. That war can be moral, that intervention can be noble, that a republic can wage eternal war and still claim to stand for the people. The phrase spreading democracy became the modern echo of SPQR. Regime changes, invasions, and occupations across the 20th and 21st centuries were justified not by conquest but by cause. The language was new, the logic was ancient. Historians still debate whether modern democracies are heirs of the Roman ideal or prisoners of its illusion. But the pattern is hauntingly familiar. A Senate declares, the people support, and the war machine turns again. One strange chapter captures this cycle with chilling clarity: Operation Iraqi Freedom. In 2003, coalition forces invaded Iraq under the banner of liberation, democracy, and justice. Statues toppled, flags waved, but what followed was chaos, insurgency, and civilian suffering. And yet the justification remained. We bring freedom. We protect peace. We are the people. SPQR updated for the evening news. Even today's symbols are powerful currency: a waving flag, a carved eagle soaring above marble steps, a motto etched in stone echoed in silence. They reassure us, make us feel righteous. They turn the horror of war into the honor of sacrifice, and they allow nations to act not with guilt, but with glory. Rome didn't invent endless war, but it mastered the art of cloaking it, and the world took notes. So when you walk through the streets of Rome and see SPQR etched into a manhole cover, or carved into a marble column, or stamped on a city bus, know that you're looking at more than a relic. You're looking at a blueprint, a reminder that the sharpest weapons are not always made of iron. Some are made of stories, some are written in stone, and some, like SPQR, never fade at all. It begins with 4 letters, so simple, so clean: SPQR. They once stirred pride in the heart of a Roman citizen. They once adorned victory arches, golden coins, and the shields of legions marching off to glory. But glory, we've learned, has shadows. Behind every chiseled inscription, behind every triumphal parade, there were questions left unasked. Who whispered yes before the sword was drawn? Who vanished into history unnamed, uncounted? Over time, the symbol untethered itself from its origin. No longer a pact between Senate and people, it became a seal, a stamp, a signature that turned ambition into law and conquest into creed. And this perhaps is the most haunting truth. The most enduring empires don't conquer by brute force alone. They conquer by shaping perception, by making the sword look like a pen, and war look like duty. In that way, SPQR never died. Through the entire history of the Roman Empire, it evolved, finding new alphabets, new acronyms, new banners. Today, the battles may wear different uniforms. The speeches may echo in new languages, The ruins may be digital instead of stone, but the story is the same. A republic dreams, a republic bleeds, and the dream is weaponized. So let us remember not to fear symbols, but to question them, to peel back the gold leaf, to listen not to the slogans, but to the silence between them. Because in every age, someone will rise to tell you, we are the people. This is for peace. And in that moment, the marble breathes again, whispering the same four letters that never truly died. SPQR.